Last on the list is Dwayne Thompson. Um, Dwayne, along with his wife and several of their adult children, own and operate T2 Land and Cattle Company in the Parkland region near Kelleher, Saskatchewan. It's a family operation that focuses on the people and the land. Soil health and regenerative agriculture are the driving force. We believe that managing our multiple enterprise business holistically will enable us to be self-insured and provide long-term profitability, resiliency, and desirable standard of life for all of those involved. So please take it away, Dwayne.
Well, thank you very much, and it's certainly a privilege to be on this panel, and you know, the previous speakers certainly highlighted many of the things that I'm going to be touching base on within our own operation here as well. And I guess to start off, you know, I titled my presentation Systems Management, and it really is the highlight that all of agriculture runs on a system, and you know, every operation has its own system. An integrated system like ours is nothing new. Of course, it's probably the oldest system. My great-grandfather right through to us now operated a mixed operation. And regenerative agriculture is a buzzword, and one of the questions I've had many times is it scalable? And I guess what I would like to you know, today emphasize is most certainly is scalable, and in fact probably to a greater extent. If we use larger numbers, you can affect a larger amount of ground. So I would just like to start that you know, a systems management system with regenerative agriculture is definitely scalable, and it's I think it as Christine said in my opening, is that I feel that it's very sustainable and it's profitable, because you know, I've been able to build the business to the point where just like my folks did, enabled me to come back to their business. And now we've got two of our children and our daughters also involved back in our business. So I just like to say that it's definitely scalable. If you could go to the next slide, please. So we're Kelleher, Saskatchewan is right at the star. It's the center of the world, center of our world, and it's in the Aspen Parkland. It's the kind of sandy brown soils and or sandy black loam soils. A lot of you know, like I say, we're actually the second highest point in Saskatchewan, right where we are. It's the highest point that was covered by glaciation, but the water doesn't go anywhere, so we have a lot of pockets. Go to the next slide, please. When I came home for my very first when I was, you know, I helped my parents and whatnot while I was going to university and high school and everything else, but my first full year home began in 1989. And this was spring of 1989, taken out of my folks' dining room window, and the dust flying, and you know, the system they had of the day relied on cultivation, a fair bit of summer following. And of course, when you got a dry year, 1988 was very dry, and 89 was a dry spring, and the wind blew, and ultimately you've got soil in the air. And so, you know, thankfully that we've got the technology today that we can, we've almost eliminated this. You know, we had a lot of wind this past winter, and we don't see the dirt drifts that we used to on the snowbanks. And that's really a great thing, because our soil was in dire trouble if we can continue to have the technology of the day that we did when I first started farming. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview, a real quick map. This is our land-based map in our coffee room, where we get together and we plan out fences and everything. But as you can see, it's the pothole parkland, and we have a lot of that area that, you know, Ducks Unlimited, I have to say, you know, they've really made a big difference, where they promote programs where we can work with these areas and optimize our system. You know, I was a student of holistic management quite a few years ago now. And one of the things that really resonated with me was number one, you optimize your people resource, and you try to build a lifestyle and a working environment that really focuses on the people and then optimizes all the resources you have. But, secondly, of course, the land resource. And then there, everybody's got their own set of resources. Well, this is our set of resources. We're fortunate to have a good bit of our land contiguous, and if it's not touching, we've got it's very close by, and so we can use it for the animals in a rotation system. You can go to the next slide, please. So our topsoil is of course, in this area, it's not very thick. It's a very I'm just trying to follow along with mine, and this doesn't want to fall. So the topsoil is not very thick. If we have topsoil 4 to 6 inches thick, that's what we're working with here. And so it's very vulnerable to erosion, especially on those hilltops that David mentioned, the eroded hilltops. And we put a lot of effort into keeping those in rebuilding those eroded hilltops, because that top 4 to 6 inches is the wealth of our land. If we don't take care of that, it's not going to take care of us. Go to the next slide, please. So our rotation is somewhere within a 10 to 14 year rotation. It's half that time in forages and half that time in annual crops. There's a list of the forages that we use when we seed down a stand. It gets seeded down with a cover crop of an annual with peas to use for summer feed. We seed that really early in the spring so that we can get it off and get the perennials well established. And one of the things that Ducks Unlimited have really focused on is trying to optimize those marginal areas. So we also use a designated blend in the wet areas around what I like to call the evaporation zones. And through my career, I've seen those evaporation zones vary incredibly. My dad has been here farming. Well, he was born in 32, so he's seen a lot of ground, and he's 90 years old now. And we've had it so wet that he didn't recognize land that he's farmed his whole life. And we've had it extremely dry, where he's a crop reporter for the province, and he's recorded the least amount of rain that he has ever known. And so we've seen all extremes within that. And so we try to plant species that thrive in the different areas, and it's working out very well. As you drive across the prairies, you see these little big areas of saline or they just they're either too wet or that they don't grow very well. But if we seed the proper species in there, they can be quite productive and provide so many different things, habitat and all that goes along with that. And then, of course, for the other 5 to 7 years, we just use regular annual crops, and all the byproducts are used through the cattle operation. What I like about our operation, especially this year, is about 55 to 60% of our nitrogen on any given year is free, because we use a lot of legumes. Our forage stands, as you can see, are high degree legumes. And then, of course, we grow peas in our annual stands, and that we don't have to put nitrogen in that. So next slide, please. And we direct seed everything. Our annual crop is direct seeded, and even when we take our forages out, we terminate it with glyphosate, and then we go in and we can direct seed into that. And by doing that on that program, we've been able to, the very first quarter of land that my dad bought in the early 50s, we've kept pretty close track of the organic matter on that. And it's at a point now that it's about 2.5 times the average organic matter in our area. So I'm really pleased with that. Next slide. As I said, we try to optimize the system and utilize the resources. And one of the underused resources that I feel in our systems is the byproducts after harvesting our annual crops. So we still pull one of those little wagons behind our combines and make little piles, and then we string out wires all winter long and limit feed it. And we've just finished that, And we try to be done in February sometime so that the snow doesn't become too big of a challenge in the grazing. Next slide. Summertime is termed. There's many terms for what we do, but I like to call it a multi-paddock adaptive grazing. And the reason that term was coined by other people smarter than me. It just means that day to day we manage on the fly and we have a plan, but it's adaptive. We adapt to the conditions of the day. And but the thing that doesn't change is the fact that we try to make it short harvest, long rest. And I continue to be just so thrilled with the amount of forages that we can grow doing that. Next slide. And if I didn't take pictures of cows in grass, I wouldn't be given a presentation. So I have to give a couple of them. These are full grown cows and we can grow a lot of forage in this. And our land isn't great farming land. It's, like I said, it's pretty conducive to mixed farming, but we certainly can grow a lot of grass. Next slide. And, that's just shit, but it's that little guy. He'll have about a dozen of his friends on top of that paddy, and they just follow the herd. And there's been times when it's really, you've got all these little guys flying around you when you're moving them, and they're just following the herd and taking and building that soil and taking all the nutrients back down in. And they're such a critical component to the system. And I get pretty excited, and I look at the manure for a lot of reasons. It shows the nutrition of the animals, but it tells me what's happening in the soil. Next slide, please. So in the wintertime, we feed the cattle on those residue piles, go out with the truck with a V-plow on the front and dump silage on it and keep moving the cattle. And I feel that the biological effect on the soil is really enhancing it as well. And that way we can continue to do it around the clock, around the calendar. Sorry, my office is in the shop and the compressor is running. So if you hear a background noise, that's what that is. Next slide, please. And when the cattle are done, those residue piles, that's what's left. And we try to drop those piles out of the back of the combine on high spots. So I try to convince the cowboy or the combine jockeys to keep in mind where they're going to hit that button and leave the piles where they're needed. Next pile, please, slide, please. And that's our dirt. And it's nicely aggregated. It's getting to be higher and higher organic matter all the time. The water holding capacity is there. The nutrient value is getting higher. We don't put a lot of fertilizer down. I kind of follow a lot of the Gabe Brown principles and have had Gabe out to have a look at it. And he's thought things are going quite well for us. Next slide. So Mother Nature's a system. And I had the privilege of walking on the Serengeti a few years ago. And, when I pulled onto the Serengeti, went on a safari, this is what we saw. And there wasn't a lot of growth. And it was calving season. So that was really exciting to me. And the, hundreds of thousands of wildebeest and zebras basically harvesting rain and sunshine. The base ruminants that fired the system, that creates the soil, just exactly the way I would envision the prairies with the bison 250 years ago. And I was so excited. And a lot of people, you can hardly find a wildebeest carving. They don't celebrate the wildebeest as that base ruminant that fires the system. But I got myself one that I'm happy with because I think that's the king of the species out there. The migration, this has been happening for thousands and thousands of years and building a soil, and that is really not good dirt at all, but yet a sustainable system that's been going forever. And this picture just meant 1,000 words to me. And so I had to show that, it showed the migration and year in, year out, they followed that. And when I saw that little bit of grass, I thought, how could this be sustainable? If you go to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, that's the migration. I'm looking at one thing and you're seeing another. So that's the migration, and it shows the different how it peels off in the different seasons. And if you go to the next slide, please. About 3 hours later, we drove into this, grass that there's a full grown adult line out there somewhere that the guide could just see his tail, and grass that was so tall. And I went to walk out to look in this grass, and he says, "You better get out of there because you don't know what's in there." And but there was forbs and legumes and grasses, and in its natural state, it was really exciting. And while the rest of them were looking at the elephant and everything else, I was looking at the grasses and thinking, this is a system. This is great. And next slide, please. So that guy, when he can hide in the previous picture of grass, it's pretty neat. And next slide. So that's how they were farming it there, and that's how the way we were farming in 1989 and previous to it with my grandfathers on our system wasn't a lot different with this on the effect on the soil. Go to the next slide. But this was the result of that, and the erosion in those areas was just so shocking how it eroded that soil, and I don't know, it would take thousands of years to get back to anything productive in this. And there was thousands and thousands of acres that looked like this there. So when we talk about our technology that we have available today, we can use that within the system, and we don't have to have this. We don't have to have what we had in 1989, and we might have to use some chemicals and technology that we have today. But I truly believe that we can create a sustainable system. If you could go to the next slide, please. And with that sustainable system comes this, and it's families. And this is, this was when our kids were all really little, and now this is actually quite a few years ago, the top, but it's families, and it's families on the ground. It's families, agriculture's changed a lot, but it's still families on the ground. And that's what is going to continue. That's the strength of this industry. And if you could go to the next slide, please. We changed titles this past year, and we had a couple of grandchildren, and Lenny sitting with me looks like she'd be a lot happier with her grandmother, but I guess that's just what I would like to leave you with. It truly is a system, and it truly is if we look at the system, regenerative agriculture is real. We can accomplish it. We can do so many things that are not new by any sense, but in sync with nature. Work with our environmental groups, work within our systems. Not every piece of land is the same as ours. We all have our own different resources, but we can operate sustainably. And I thank you for your time today listening to what I had to say.